Okay, so tonight we're going to go over chapter 9 and 10, and the reason that they're combined is because it's almost the same thing, but just a little bit of a different concept because chapter 9 deals with some misdemeanor crimes and documentation, and 10 deals with felony, and it's more property crime than anything else. But let me show you real quick if you didn't happen to get the announcements, and I hope that you did. Let's see here. Okay, so for your outline for your homicide report, and if you click on this little link right here, and this is in your final report module, and you scroll down in here, there we go. So I put together a video with a couple of examples on what an outline should look like. And just so you know, the outline it's not your full-blown report. It doesn't even have to be a draft. It's more of kind of your notes. And that's what this video really shows you as far as how to put that draft together. And then if you go to in the same module area, so that's for your outline. And again, it tells you here, outline of your homicide report. If you go up a little bit further here, it talks a little bit more about your actual final report, where I show you a couple examples of a final report as well. So this is kind of more the project overview, and the other video is geared more towards just the outline, if that makes sense. Okay, so hopefully everybody knows where that's at, and with that being said, let's just kind of pop right into our lecture for tonight. So as I said, chapter 9 talks a little bit about misdemeanor crimes involving people and property. And for the most part, these are going to be crimes that you are going to be able to either, well, you can arrest somebody and you can take them to county jail, etc., or you can actually release them on a citation. So some misdemeanors, depending upon your agency's policy, they may not want you to release on a misdemeanor. Any type of certain domestic violence misdemeanor, typically we don't cite release on that. Sometimes even department policy might dictate certain firearms misdemeanors. So things like that, you may not be released on a citation from the station or out in the field or something like that. But for the most part, this chapter is going to focus kind of on misdemeanor. So what we want to be able to do is to kind of look at some of the different types of misdemeanors against people and property that you may encounter during your time as a law enforcement officer, and recognize that each state is different, and we've kind of learned that a little bit. Remember that not every state is the same on how they do things, especially on how crimes are defined, and because of that, you have to ensure that you document the crime in accordance with your state statutes. And we've talked about making sure that you include all the elements in your case. In order to make that case, you're going to need to get all of the elements in, if you will. So misdemeanor crimes involving people and property might seem like minor types of cases or reports, but these types of crimes are very, very commonplace, which means they happen a lot, and they need to be properly documented to facilitate any potential future prosecution and any closure of an incident. So, while they might seem, does it really matter? Do I really need to document this? Because it's just kind of a minor thing. Well, because of the frequency of a lot of these types of crimes, yeah, you're going to need to document because you might have a pattern or somebody that's a repeat offender, etc. So that's why we want you to kind of, really pay attention to that. And misdemeanor crimes know that they can be nonviolent or violent. And the example that I can give you would be, um, you know, let's say graffiti versus assault. So graffiti, everybody knows, is, either spray painting or writing or damaging somebody's property, through the use of paint or glue or different things like that, where assault is going to be an attack on an individual person. And while commonplace for the average, police officer, meaning that they happen a lot again, they can still be serious as it relates to the victim. So, again, part of this whole lecture talks about that you need to support the elements of the offense, and we're going to take a look at some of those. So this simple picture right here. So you can see this person right here in the background, hopefully, and he's holding up a firearm. Misdemeanor or felony? Anybody? Or what do you think?
In California, I believe it's a felony to have a loaded firearm.
Okay. We'll hold on to that thought for a minute.
He doesn't appear to be threatening anybody. He's just trying to give a warning off. So I don't know. I mean, if he discharged it, then I would definitely say felony.
Okay. So, and this is why it's important to kind of understand the elements. Simple possession of a firearm, believe it or not, is only a misdemeanor. But discharging it could change that element from a misdemeanor to a felony. Or if he's on probation or parole, then that's definitely going to change as well. That would be a felon with a firearm, which makes it, things a little bit different. So again, this is why it's important that we kind of dig into the elements. And it wouldn't be the first time, even though this is kind of a staged photo, where you pull someone over and you're going to see this, believe it or not. You're going to see a gun laying right on the floorboard, right on the seat, right on, wherever. And you have to be able to articulate the elements of the crime. And we'll take a look at what some of those are. But typically, possessing a loaded firearm in California is a misdemeanor, generally speaking. Which is kind of odd because possession of, brass knuckles can be a felony. So it's kind of weird, right? On how one that can do so much more damage, right? The weapon type itself can be less as far as, the severity of the crime than the other one. But here are some typical misdemeanor cases that you're probably going to run into. And I'll show you just really quick. I'm not going to back out of this all the way, but I wanted you to be able to see, minor assaults, and we're just going to take a look at a couple sections. But if you go to a website, so it's basically legalinfo.gov, and I know it might be hard for you to see the link up here, but you can go to the California Legislative Information website, and it will have all of the California codes in it. And not just the penal codes, but health and safety codes and vehicle codes and different things like that. And so when we look at different sections, as we're trying to figure out, hey, how do I write this section? So if we're looking for Penal Code 240, which is assault, we can go to the actual section and we can see what we have to prove. What are the elements that go into that? And by definition, an assault is the unlawful attempt coupled with the present ability to commit a violent injury on another person. It's not a whole lot there. And then you can go a step further and, you've probably heard the phrase, assault and battery. So the assault is the attempted, as kind of an attempted battery, and the battery is the actual striking of the individual. So in order to have that battery case, somebody has to actually be touched. And hopefully that makes sense. So a battery is any willful or unlawful use of force or violence upon the person of another. So it's important that we understand, again, all the elements to these different types of crimes. And I'm not going to go through each one of these. I just wanted to show you that there is a website where you can, or you can click on these links. They're live, and it will take you to these to the legislative website, and you can kind of look them up yourself. So we have trespassing. This is typically something that you end up getting a lot. We have harassment both by phone or by stalking section. And these are typical things that you're going to run across. And some of these might actually end up being what we call a wobbler, which means that it could be a misdemeanor or a felony depending upon certain circumstances. So we have to kind of understand that, hey, this could be either or. And the way that you find out when you're looking at these kinds of sections, and I'll go back here to the 646 section. Let me see if I can find where I pulled it up here. It's not that one. That's the 602 section. Let's do this. Okay. So some of these sections right here, so if you look at 646.9, this is kind of one of the stalking sections where it can be a misdemeanor or a felony. So, and the way you can find that out is it'll tell you in the section. Okay, punishable by imprisonment in the county jail for 1 year, and that's typically a misdemeanor, county jail for 1 year or less, or by imprisonment in the state prison. That's usually a year or more. So a lot of times it will tell you exactly what you need to know, if you're trying to figure out, hey, is this a misdemeanor or is this a felony section? Okay, so there's some typical drug sections like possession of certain controlled substances, under the influence of controlled substances. You probably recognize this one. This is a DUI section. Minor theft. So, stealing from a store, things like that. These are all things that you're going to run across. And typically, if you want, because you have discretion, you can cite release individuals on some of these sections. But again, your policy will dictate whether or not you are allowed to cite release somebody. And it doesn't mean that they get away with the crime. It means that you issue them a citation and they have to appear in court just like a traffic ticket. And there'll be the whole possible issue of either a misdemeanor trial. Most misdemeanors are pled out, just by their very nature. As far as misdemeanor, property crimes usually associated with some type of financial loss to the victim. Most states distinguish the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony by the amount, by the dollar amount. So again, it's important for you to verify the cost of the item. So as you write some of these reports, and next week's report, not the current week, but next week is going to be a robbery report, the amount for robbery really doesn't make a difference. But if it's a grand theft versus a petty theft, that's going to be the difference between a misdemeanor and a felony. As I said a moment ago, punishment for misdemeanor crimes are typically less than a year in the county jail, a fine, restitution, which means you have to pay the victim back or fix whatever you damaged or broke, etc., or it could be all of them. And so these are different avenues as they relate to a misdemeanor. One of the biggest or the most frequent things that you're going to run across is this section right here. It's Penal Code 484, and it's the crime of petty theft. And it's described as or defined as the wrongful taking or stealing of someone else's property when the value is $950 or less. If it's more than $950, then it becomes a felony because then it turns into grand theft. So you can see there's a dollar amount there. So again, going back to how you document your report, it's important that you understand or you ask the victim what the value of the property was or how much money was taken, etc. So is this going to be a misdemeanor type case or a felony? There are some exceptions. The theft of certain types of property, like a firearm, is grand theft regardless of the value. So even if the firearm is a $300 firearm, it's still going to be grand theft. So there are certain things that, the dollar amount really doesn't matter. It's the item itself. 487 is the penal code again for grand theft. And this is unlawfully taking someone's property valued at $950 or more. We talked about it. It can be a wobbler at times, so it can be charged as a misdemeanor or a felony, and it carries a maximum sentence of up to 3 years in prison. So for grand theft. Some examples of property crimes that you're going to run into, when we've covered some, would be theft, what we call criminal mischief, vandalism, damage to private property. These are all different types of misdemeanor crimes that you're going to run into typically. When you're investigating property crimes and when the situation allows, ask the victim if they have any type of documentation for whatever it was that might have been taken. So that way you're a little bit more accurate as it relates to how much the item might be valued at, like a sales receipt. But not everybody keeps all their sales receipts, so a lot of times you have to just kind of go based on what they tell you. Also, you can ask for original paperwork, and the reason that you're going to want to do that is you're going to want to, and yes, that is per count, Dale. So if and if it all happens at the same time, then it could be just one report. But no, so yeah, so what Dale's asking, if you guys, and I'm not sure you can see the chat, or maybe you can because I'm sharing my screen, it would be the total amount of the items that were taken. So it's not going to be one count of petty theft times 10 if they took 10 items. It would just be the total amount of property that was taken. Now, if they came back 10 different times, that would be different. One act where multiple items are taken, it's just the value of the property at that particular time. Keep in mind, serial numbers are super important. And the reason for that is when you take a report of an item, whether it's a bicycle, a firearm, or something else, you want to document that serial number because we put that into a stolen property system. And if somebody else gets stopped, let's say riding a bicycle, and it doesn't belong to them, and the officer runs the serial number, then it could come back stolen. Same with a firearm or anything else with an identifying type serial number, a computer, different things like that. So asking for that serial number is really, really important so we can get that information put into that stolen property system. Remember that crimes involving property require that additional property page. So we know that, from taking reports already, we know that you can use that all-inclusive form that has all 4 of the pages, but you want to document any property that was stolen, and make sure that that's on your property list. And this is kind of, and you've seen this before, this is kind of what an evidence report looks like. It's the same with a stolen property report. So you want the item number, how many of each items were there, the brand, the model, the description, the serial number, or anything that was damaged, if you can get it. Most people may not know they might know the model or the brand name, but they may not know the serial number. So you can still take the report, and then they can call in if they locate the serial number or the paperwork when they purchase the item later, and you can add that on to the report. But that's what your evidence and your property report is for. Also, remember value. A lot of people take pictures of things. So if you have a photograph of something unique, it would be good to maybe, photocopy that photograph and attach it to your report, because there might be something that's just kind of, maybe they don't know the serial number of it, but it's different. It's very unique looking, and most people they'd be able to describe it if it was found, etc. So these are just a couple of helpful hints when it comes to property crimes. And you've already seen these reports, so we won't spend a lot of time talking about the actual forms, and because we've gone over these already. But here's your property right here, and then you also have your evidence page. So make sure that you're filling those out, even on these small reports. And here's a couple of different examples. This is a Riverside Sheriff property report. So it's all typically the same thing, but you want to make sure that you document everything. And then just like in any other report, remember to tell the story of the incident in chronological order, simple and understandable words. Remember when writing the report that the proper information and evidence collection is crucial to support a subsequent legal proceeding, or for documentation for insurance companies, or anything else, especially if the suspects end up getting caught later. Remember to review your statutes, meaning what are the elements of the crime, so you can make sure that you're actually documenting the right crime and that you're asking the right questions to make sure that you can establish whatever that crime is. So some tips for misdemeanor crimes, again, often defined as an attempt, when we talk about assault and battery, it's an attempt to injure someone else, and in some circumstances can include threats or threatening behavior. So again, just trying to tell you, make sure that you check the elements of the crime so you know exactly what you're looking at. And a prime example would be robbery versus burglary. A lot of people get those two crimes mixed up because they really don't know what the elements of the crime are. Okay, so let me see if I need to, we've already talked about that. All right, so some final tips regarding crimes against property. Take the time to document, again, the property items. Look for serial numbers, photographs, receipts. Again, any distinguishing characteristics. Maybe they don't know the serial number, but there's something kind of different about it. Document and take pictures. Have the victim contact you a few days after for additional photos, especially if you're doing a crime versus person. So we could probably talk about, and we won't do it too much, but I'm sure if anybody watched the recent, was it the Oscars where Will Smith slapped Chris Rock?
Yeah, I saw that.
Okay, so that was a battery by definition, okay, and technically an assault and battery, but a battery by definition. And a lot of times when you're investigating those types of crimes, you're going to want to come back maybe a couple of days later and take additional pictures. Any idea why we would do that?
To document injury.
Yeah, because a lot of times, people, the injury may not show up right away. The slap mark may not be quite as visible. There may not be any, swelling or anything like that. You might just get a little bit of redness. So you're going to want to take pictures right away, but you're going to want to come back later on and take a few extra pictures just in case, there's something visible now that you want to document. And then you also want to document if there's any medical attention that was required, and describe that in detail as well. Okay, so that's misdemeanor. We're just going to jump right into the other one, talking a little bit about felonies. And it's almost the same thing. Okay, as far as the concept relating to taking the report. But I wanted to show you a couple of different felony crimes. There are some things that you typically might run across. And, again, making sure that we know what the elements are. Now, some of these, again, can be wobblers, and it depends on your city, your state, or certain things. So, theft, grand theft, right? Or certain types of theft, even vandalism, while it's technically a misdemeanor, it can be a felony based on the amount of property damage that's done. So these are, again, some things that you're going to kind of run across. And so make sure we read the elements. Auto theft, there's actually 2 sections for auto theft, believe it or not. The 487.3 is grand theft auto, and the 10851 is a vehicle code section that talks about taking a vehicle without an owner's consent. They're both technically felonies, but 2 different sections. Burglary is a felony, and you're going to run across these sections all the time, and we've kind of looked at elements for that. Go ahead, Scott.
So do you get charged with 2 different crimes if you steal a vehicle?
Most officers will do that. So that's a really good question. And when you look at these, it's kind of interesting. Most officers will definitely charge the person with both, and then the district attorney will kind of make the decision on whether or not which one they want to charge, or if they want to charge both, because they are 2 separate sections. So good question, and kind of an interesting, kind of turn of events when you talk about that. Let me see if this will let me. Yeah, it may not. Let me see if I can move this here. Let me see if I can find the. Yeah, it's not going to let me take it there. All right. Yeah, so, kind of interesting when you look at the section here, grand theft, you go down to section 487.3 and you go down to the bottom, it says an automobile. So, it talks about, when any of these things exceeding this amount are taken. And the other one is more like taking a vehicle without owner's consent. But since they're 2 separate sections, again, law enforcement will charge both a lot of times. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic, actually, on why they would do that. And the DAs let them do that, so it's not like a no-no. But I'll see if I can find that section for you. Let me see if I can find it since you asked the question.
It's mainly because it's strictly a vehicle, so you have your vehicle code and then also your just your standard criminal code.
Yeah, it's the penal code versus the vehicle code. There we go. Let's see if it'll put it in there for me.
So do they treat like felony hit and run similarly if there's like bodily harm or death or anything like that, where you can be charged with the vehicle code as well as a separate penal code, or is that just all one and the same?
It's all one and the same. With a hit and run, there's a section for hit and run with injury. But here you can see, so kind of different sections. So here's the vehicle code. So, any person who drives or takes a vehicle, not theirs, without the owner's consent, and with intent to permanently deprive or temporarily deprive thereof, whether, with or without intent to steal the vehicle, etc. I mean, it's kind of a different approach. The other is just, it's grand theft, it's over $950, or it's a vehicle. So that's grand theft vehicle. And then this one talks a little bit more about, and sometimes, you ever heard the phrase joyriding? Yeah, there's a separate section for that, but if you can't really prove the intent for grand theft, a lot of DAs will file this because the intent is a little bit different. So just kind of an interesting dynamic as it relates to those 2 types of crimes. So that's a really good question that you asked. But yeah, A lot of times law enforcement will charge both and kind of let the DA sort it out and decide which one that they can prove. Some other felony sections that are there would be, typically vandalism, under a certain amount is a misdemeanor, unless you tag or vandalize a house of worship. Then it's got its own section and it becomes a felony. So that's why, again, it's important to understand all of the elements, because sometimes vandalism can be a felony based on the dollar amount or certain things that are vandalized, like in this case, graffiti to a church is a felony, and the dollar amount of damage doesn't matter. And keep in mind the writing style for felony crimes involving property is basically the same as for misdemeanor. One exception, the monetary value of the property taken, or the type of property taken. You're going to do the same investigation typically for a misdemeanor or felony, but it's going to be the difference in the property, or maybe a little more thorough of an investigation for a felony, because you might be talking about burglaries or embezzlements or things that are a little bit, more detailed as far as the criminal element goes. But it's still going to be the same kind of style. So we have theft of firearms, kind of an example. And you've already seen all the report forms, so I don't need to spend time with that. Just like with misdemeanors, know that, you have to read the statute to make sure that you can reach that threshold for whatever the crime is. Penalties for felony crimes are typically more than a year, versus less than a year for misdemeanors. Misdemeanors are usually county jail time, less than a year. Felonies are more than a year and typically in state prison, although they are putting some felons into county jails just to kind of let you know, because of overcrowding and things like that. So that does happen. So we kind of know the difference between those two. So when you talk about felony cases with property, same thing. Make sure you know the elements and then the dollar amount that you're dealing with as it relates to property. Same kind of things. Look for serial numbers or document serial numbers. Look for identifying marks or different features. Any photos of missing items. A lot of people may not have, let's say for jewelry, they may not save their receipts, or they may not have a photo of it, so they're just going to kind of describe it to you. Or you might get lucky and they might have a picture. I talk about something like this. This is kind of unique. So somebody that owned this would probably be able to describe this, and, not many people probably have that type of item. So somebody really would be able to describe something like that to you, and it would be so unique that you could probably put that in the stolen property system by description, etc. Because if you do recover certain things, we don't want to, release property to the wrong person. So you want to make sure that they can describe it as well. A lot of times, like I said, the victims aren't going to have any specifics. And because of that, you really want to educate them on the importance of recording serial numbers or keeping receipts or photographing high dollar items. And it's not like we all have all these high dollar items, but if I were to ask any of you, have you gone through your house and photographed all of your high dollar items? Some of you might have, but if you haven't, if something gets stolen and you don't have a receipt, how are you going to prove that it was really stolen to your insurance company? The way you'll do that is through a picture. So a lot of times it's not a bad idea to take a picture like, the front of your TV and then the serial number or something like that, or any other high dollar items in your home, just for your own protection later on should something happen, in your own home, etc. So that's a good time to, educate folks. And then the last thing that we'll talk about is this kind of interesting section. And it's 496 of the Penal Code. And this is one of those sections that it's gray, but a lot of officers use this section when they run across individuals that have something either in their car, on their person, The example I guess we could use would be this Rolex watch right here. And they have no way to prove that it belongs to them or what have you. So this is going to sound like kind of, I'm not trying to be demeaning, but I'm going to give you the best example I can. Let's say that you work in an area in your city that's a high narcotics area. You know, a lot of drug trafficking, a lot of people under the influence, etc. Okay. And you end up seeing somebody walking down the street that you've arrested before for under the influence. And this person is a drug addict, which means that they are always looking for, oh, I may have just like lost you guys. All right, I think we're back. Did somehow we got knocked off?
Thank you.
All right, good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.